8 years ago, I moved here to the US, and back then I thought I might move back to the UK in the first year or two. But as it turns out, I'm still here 8 years later. There's a lot of reasons. The friends, communities I'm part of are a big one of them. But above all else, I think there's one thing the US offers that my home country just doesn't. It is wide open, vast expanses of nature. There are wonderful places in the UK that are pretty remote. The Scottish Highlands and the Islands are both fantastic places and particular favourites of mine, but nowhere quite does vast expanses of relatively untouched wilderness like the Americans. I think maybe the American reaction to anything which is to build a road there is a big part of this. They're very accessible, they're everywhere, but at the end of the day, it's here. And while my trusty Jeep has served me well for 3 or 4 years now, I do sometimes find myself shivering in a tent and thinking, there are more comfortable ways to explore the wilderness. Ones that are still pretty mobile and pretty go anywhere, like the Jeep is, but where I can have a bit more relative comfort. And so, of course, I went down the only natural course of action, which is to do it not the easy way, but the hard way. And of course, build myself a camper van. This is a 2021 Ford Transit, and it's my choice of vehicle to turn into a camper van. Over the course of this video series, I'm going to chronicle my hopefully successful attempts to turn it into a camper van, something nice and cozy I can take on trips around the US and maybe even further afield. And my plan is to cover roughly one build topic per video. And the first build video will be next time with the subject of flooring and laying down the flooring inside this thing. But before any build starts, it's important to plan. And so in this episode, I want to talk about planning. In particular, when you're planning a camper van build such as this, there are two real considerations. Even if you're not doing the conversion yourself, you'll have to make these choices. The first one, of course, is which van you take, which model, which size. And the second choice is the layout inside the van. And I'm going to try and cover both of these today and talk about my choices and what I picked and the potential set of options there are out there. So let's talk about choosing the van first of all, and honestly choosing the model of van. Depending on where you live, there are a bigger or smaller selection of vans you can purchase. And here in the US, where I happen to live, people have not yet quite realized the superiority of the van over the pickup truck. And so there's less options than, say, in Europe. There are in fact 3 models on offer in the American market. There is the Ford Transit, there's one right there. There is the Mercedes Sprinter, and there is the Ram ProMaster, which if you live anywhere else in the world, you will know as a Fiat Ducato. Apparently, it wasn't an impressive enough name for the American market. Now, each of these 3 vans has their pros and cons, and there's no obvious reason to pick any particular one of them, so let me talk through my reasoning on why I picked the Transit. First of all, let's start with the Ram ProMaster, or as it's usually known, the Fiat Ducato. The Ducato in Europe is the most popular base for camper van conversions. There's a reason for that. It's very decently priced, it has nice straight square walls that make installing things easier, and it has front wheel drive, which if you're going to have 2-wheel drive, front wheel drive is probably the better option for controllability in some situations. However, of course, it won't do super well if you've got a very heavily laden rear axle, such as when you've got a very heavy conversion in the back, so it's kind of a trade-off. Either way though, the ProMaster or the Ducato is pretty popular both in Europe and increasingly here in the US, especially for van builders. I think the price is a very big part of that. It's a very decent vehicle for its price. However, there's 2 things that rule it out for me. First of all, it only comes with 2-wheel drive. Now, until recently, that was true of the Transit too, but they've fixed that, as we'll talk about in a second. Right now, in the current market, the ProMaster here in the US is the only van that comes without some kind of 4-wheel or all-wheel drive option. So here, living in Colorado, it's literally snowing outside as I record this. Not really the best choice of vehicle. I want something that has some kind of traction on slippery surfaces. And second, and even more important than the choice of traction on the wheels, is the interior height. The Sprinter and the Transit come in some lovely, very tall versions where I, as a 6'2" or 188 centimeter tall person, can stand up inside. Unfortunately, the ProMaster does not come in a super high roof option. It only comes in a high roof option, which I cannot stand up in, even empty, let alone before I put a floor and a ceiling in there. So that's unfortunately why that gets ruled out. So let's talk about the Sprinter and the Transit now. As I mentioned, the Transit has gained an all-wheel drive option in recent model years, which is honestly very welcome, and thank you to Ford for putting that in there. And that really competes nicely with the Sprinter, which obviously comes and has come with a four-wheel drive option for many, many years. In fact, that's the reason the Sprinter has been so popular in the van conversion community for so long. It was, for many years, the only four-wheel drive option you could get. So if you were going off-road at all, that was the one you would pick. But now, of course, we have a choice. And secondly, in terms of heights, the Sprinter does come in an ultra-high roof version, whereas the Transit just comes in a quite high roof version, the one behind me. But both of those highest versions of their vans have plenty of room for me to stand up in. It's about 2 meters inside for the Transit. If you go up to the Sprinter, it's going to be about 2.25 meters. In inches, I think it's 110 for the Transit, 120 for the Sprinter. These numbers are approximately correct. Don't quote me on these. But the point is, I can stand up inside them. And being able to stand up inside a van, to me, is super important. So big tick for both of them there. Not really a big place to compare. The van shape and body shape are also pretty similar. Both do have more curved walls than the ProMaster. That makes it a bit harder to fit cabinetry and walls, but I'm up for a bit of a challenge. That's fine by me. To me, the biggest difference between the two of these models is not just the entry-level price. Buying a Sprinter is more expensive than buying a Transit, even a Transit with as many options as this one on it. They're just more expensive vehicles. But also the maintenance is more expensive. Parts for Sprinters have to be imported. They're harder to find. Not every shop can work on them. Whereas the Transit, pretty much every auto repair shop in America has Ford parts in it. They're very common. It's a very reliable vehicle anyway. The main problem it has apparently is the back brakes occasionally wear out a bit fast, but it's a very decent vehicle. And so mostly on the maintenance costs and the running costs and the initial costs, but also a little bit on, I just prefer the Ford driving experience, I chose the Transit. So with the van model chosen, I then have to think about what size of van I want. Because within a range like the Transit or the Sprinter, there are many different lengths and heights of vans you can get. Generally, you get a couple of different length options, a short wheelbase, a long wheelbase, and a long wheelbase extended usually, and then some height options. A short, medium, and tall is generally how it works. Though with the ProMaster, you only get short and tall, and the tall's not very tall. Now, I picked a long wheelbase extended high roof Transit. That is the biggest one they sell. I just want the most interior space. 2 reasons. One, I'm tall. I need all the height I can get. And when I make a bed, I need all the length I can get. And secondly, I just think I want extra space. Space is already at a premium in van conversion, and going for a smaller van really squeezes things, especially when you're trying to get as much in as I am, as you'll see when I talk about layout. So while it took 8 months to get here, I'm pretty happy I chose the Transit. It fits all of my needs, and having driven it around to various hardware stores and other places to pick up big sheets of insulation and plywood and what have you, it's been driving really well. I'm still enjoying it now, even while it's empty, and I'm looking forward to driving it when it's full of stuff. And talking about being full of stuff, let's talk about layout. Layout is probably the single most important choice you can make in a van conversion, and one you have to do pretty much right at the beginning, apart from maybe some flooring and insulation work. You have to choose exactly what you do inside the space, and it's made more difficult by the fact that there is no perfect choice. There is not enough space inside a van to put everything you would want in there. If you want all of those things, you should just go buy a bigger RV. They make them, especially here in America. You can just buy a whole bus if you want. Plenty of space in those. But with a van, the whole point is you want a more small, maneuverable vehicle, and that means trade-offs. It means not having everything you want. And in particular, what I found in doing my layout planning is you have to know a lot of the answers to the questions of what are you using the van for, and what do you want out of it? Are you living in it full time, or like me, are using it for just reasonable long trips? Are you going to have friends over who need extra seating, or maybe even travel seating while the van's on the road? Do you want an indoor toilet and or shower? How much cooking are you doing? How much refrigeration space do you want? What kind of heating do you want? All these and more are questions you have to answer for yourself when doing a van conversion. So obviously I can't give an objective recommendation on here's the best option, but I can talk you through a few of the choices I made. So let's start with the most important choice within layout, which is the bed. The bed dominates the interior of any van conversion. It is the single biggest use of space in nearly every one. And there's a reason for that. You're going to spend a good third of the time, if not more, using it, and you want it to be comfortable. That's the whole point. You bought a portable mini room on the road with you. But again, there's a series of annoying trade-offs with beds. There are, in my mind, about 3 different kinds of bed you can have in a camper van. The first one is the fixed platform bed. This is a permanent structure built usually in the back of the van that is raised off the floor so that the bed is there always, you can't move it, you can't remove it, and there is a storage space underneath it where you can put everything, often called the garage, or if you're American, the garage. Now, the platform bed has some wonderful advantages. That big storage space is honestly the biggest one, but also the ability to have the bed permanently made up and go, oh, there's a bed, and just jump in it rather than rearranging cushions for 3 minutes. That's really nice. And the space for utilities and having the gas and the water tanks down there is super useful because in many other layouts, you're going to really try and cram those in other places. So it's really good for that. But it is also the biggest use of space. The platform bed, well, it's fixed, as I said, it doesn't move. It's going to use up an entire third or even more possibly of your van's interior space, depending on whether you build it sideways, if you're short enough, which I'm certainly not, or if you build it long ways, so you can have a bit more length so I can actually fit on the bed, and as a nice side effect, you get a bit more width as well. And it's a really difficult trade-off, and I have gone for a variation of that, as I'll talk about in a bit, but it's a difficult choice. The second one is what I would call the convertible bed. It's usually a set of like sofas or couches in the daytime where like they're often arranged either side by side or in a U shape. And then come bedtime, you slide some panels, you move some pillows, you rearrange things, and the cushioning that was on the sofa becomes essentially the mattress of the bed. Now, this is really good for use of space because you get a wonderful daytime place where you can hang out, a nice lounging area. You can put like a projector in there if you want to watch TV and stuff. It's really good for that. But of course, there's a big trade-off because it's full of trade-offs. This is a van build. And there's 2 trade-offs, in fact. One, much less storage space because generally the bed is much lower to the ground. It's at seat height rather than a bit higher like most platform beds are. So you get less space underneath. Generally you can cram some utilities and like little bits of storage in there, but you're not putting like snowboards or bikes or anything under those seats. They're pretty small. And secondly, going to bed is a procedure. You have to take all the things, you've got to rearrange them, you've got to take the linens and put them on the bed and do them up. And it can take 5 to 10 minutes depending on how good and practiced you are at it. And so that's really the trade-off. If you've got a lot of friends coming around, you're going with other people and want to sit in the van in bad weather, I think it's a great choice. It is not for me, mostly I think for the storage space reasons. The third option in my mind is the Murphy bed. A bed that is flush against the side of the van during the daytime and then folds down and becomes a bed at nighttime. Now, the Murphy bed at first glance would seem to solve both the problems of the platform bed and of the convertible bed in that it can stay made up because it stays as a single mattress. You can just keep the sheets and everything on there. Maybe you have like a big band around it to keep everything on, but like you flip it down, maybe undo the band, bam, you're good to go to bed. You've solved that problem. You've also solved the problem of wasting space in that, well, underneath the Murphy bed and the area it would fold down onto, you can have a nice little sofa and a little table that screws in and do all that stuff. So it would seem to be better. But it is also, of those options, the one with the least storage space. You get plenty of floor space, which if you want floor space, it's probably the choice for you. But you're really going to struggle to squeeze in even your basic electricity and water and gas utilities into the van, let alone any decently sized storage. So with those 3 options, well, what did I pick? I didn't quite pick any of them, and I'll tell you why. I wanted a midpoint between the fixed platform bed, I love the storage space and the idea of this big area you can put everything in, and the convertible bed where you get that space back during the day. And so my plan is a sliding platform bed. This is a platform bed that has a fixed component that's about half the length of the bed. It's always there. And below that is the permanent garage. All the storage space you could want. You can chuck big things in there. You can chuck gas tanks in there, all those things. But there's also a segment that slides out from that bed and goes to the full length of the bed. And it can slide out over some seating. And so what you've got here, as you can see, is a compromise. It does take a bit of effort to convert the bed at night. You've got to slide out the segment, move the mattress thing from being a back cushion to a main cushion, maybe tighten some sheets up. It takes like, a minute or so. But you've still got that nice seating and you've got the storage space behind the main section of the bed. And I think for me in particular, given I am reasonably tall, and I do need a reasonably tall bed, like 2 meters is my bed length I'm planning for here, which is about, 6'4", 6'5", I think, in old money. You've got to really make good use of that space. And a fixed platform bed of that length just eliminates any other casual seating in the van if you want also an interior shower and toilet, which I do. We'll come to that. But that's the problem. So the sliding bed is my solution. It's a compromise. Is it perfect? No. But I do think it's a pretty decent one. You get the platform bed, and even the segment of mattress that comes up from the slider will fit behind the main bed and become kind of a backrest and make it kind of a nice lounging area during the day, should you want it to be so. So there are some decent design things in there. It is a pretty complex mechanism to design, I'm not going to lie. I will talk all about that in a future episode, don't you worry. There's be a whole bed framing episode, at least one, if not two. But I love a challenge. And there's some good builds out there I can draw from, so we'll talk about those when we get to it. After the bed, there's a couple of other things you need to consider. First of all, as I said, is the seating. Now, I've gone for only seating for about 2 people, nice wide seats, but 2 people face to face across a table under that bed slide. That's all I want, that's all I need. You could think about more seating. So for example, if you've got kids, if you're gonna have friends over, if you want a proper seat with a seat belt for someone to sit in while you're driving, all of these are gonna take interior space away from the van. You've got to kind of plan them in, especially the seat with the seat belt way up front. So there's that, and there's also, once you're done seating, the kitchen. What do you want in a kitchen? Do you want a fridge? You probably do. Do you want a sink? Again, you probably do. Do you want a stovetop or a hob, as we call it back in the UK? Well, that's more questionable. A lot of folks just have nice countertop space, have a portable stove they pull out and cook on that, and that seems to work well for them. So you've got a lot of choices there. What I've done is I do want a fixed built-in stovetop. I'm going to plumb it into the propane I use in the van, so that's kind of an important part of it. And I do want to have a sink, obviously, to wash things. Very important part of having it part of the water system. And that does take up a bit of space, but you can get both sinks and stovetops to have sort of drop-in inserts over them that turn them into extra countertop space if you need it. So that's a good place to go when you need that stuff back. A fridge, absolutely I want a fridge. I'm sick of lugging ice-filled coolers all over the US, so that'll be a nice improvement as well. And once you've got all those things, like you've got a decent-sized kitchen, and you've got a little bit of van left. And this is where your really big question comes in, is like, do you want a bathroom? And in my mind, there are 3 levels of bathroom. There is no bathroom, where you are using gyms and supermarkets and other facilities for both showering and also for the toilet. There is toilet only, which is pretty common, where you just have a toilet inside the van. Maybe it's not intended for everyday use, but it's there in emergencies or for full use. And it's usually hidden under a counter or under a sofa, and you can like pull a thing up and a curtain comes around for some privacy and you can use it. Or do you want the full shebang? Do you want a nice little room with both a shower and a toilet in it? And well, I'm a man of creature comforts. I want the shower and the toilet. And so that's where the big rest of my van goes in terms of space. Like a cubicle that you can fit standing up in to shower in has to be a minimum width and a minimum depth, and it needs to be even deeper again still to fit a toilet in there you can sit in. Thankfully, you can combine both of them into a wet room, which is really handy. But you do end up with a big use of space. I think in my one it's about 1 meter by about 60 centimeters at least. Metric, I don't know what imperial is in that one, sorry. I'm doing all my stuff in metric because I'm European. But like, it's a decent chunk of space. Width-wise, it's almost pushing into the aisle in the van. And it is a trade-off. I could use that space instead for more seating or a nice little work area or tables, but that's not what I plan to do with the van. In my mind, most of the places I'm going, I'm going to have outdoor space for more seating, for relaxing and that kind of area. So the inside of the van is more for me the essential creature comforts. And as I said, for me, that's a shower, that's a toilet, that's cooking facilities that work, that's all that stuff. So let's talk about the last and maybe most overlooked part of layout, which is utilities. Now, everyone's going to have a power system of some kind pretty much. You have a 12-volt system, you have some batteries, they usually charge off the vehicle's alternator when you're driving, and then there's often a secondary power source like solar panels or shore power. All of that I'm doing, both of them in fact. I mean, solar panels and a shore power connection, all tied into the same system with a nice big chunk of battery. It's pretty important to me. I also going to have an inverter, like most folks do again, that steps up the power to 110 or 230 volts, depending where you live, so you can run things like laptop chargers or small kitchen appliances. Now, some folks do have a really big, beefy inverter and the accompanying batteries to run things like induction cookers. I've priced that up. I'm not going to do that. It's too rich for my blood, but there are good reasons to do it if you can afford it. Like, it's really nice to have that nice, clean way of cooking stuff, but I'm not doing that, as I'll talk about in the gas section. So I'm having just like, reasonable size inverter, some batteries, 2 solar panels on the roof, not anything particularly exciting there. There is a weight and balance thing with the batteries. They can be heavy, but mine will be low down by one of the wheel wells, so not too many problems there either. The second thing to consider is water. And water can come in many forms in a van. You can just have a couple of jugs under the sink with a pump in them, like a foot pump or a manual pump, all the way up to a big fancy system with a blue water tank and a grey water tank and a black water tank and pumps and pressurization and heating and all that stuff. I'm doing most of that. I'm going to have a pretty big blue water tank over one of my wheel wells. They make great tanks shaped to fit over the wheel well and use that annoying space. Also good for weight and balance, very important. I'm going to have a pump. I'm going to have a separate hot water system that has its own hot water lines to the shower and the sink just for that pleasure and comfort. And I'm also going to have a grey water tank under the van to collect the runoff from the shower and the sink. What I'm not doing, of course, is a black water tank because I'm going to use a composting toilet. Now, the opinion on what toilet to use can be very varied, but I've used composting toilets in many different backcountry situations in different places throughout the US West. They generally work pretty well. I've heard pretty good things about them, and the ability to avoid having a black water system and emptying that stuff, I will go for that. That sounds fantastic. So I have a composting toilet coming. That will be my solution. No black water tank needed, just grey water. And if you use biodegradable detergents and stuff, you can even dump the grey water in reasonable places away from streams and stuff, of course, but on soil as long as you use the right stuff in it. So it makes you a bit more mobile, a bit less tied to having to find like an RV dump station here in the US. And then once you've passed water and power, you then have the third thing. And I'm not going to give it a name because it depends what you're doing here. And the key thing that drives it is air heating. Because if you live in a cold area or somewhere that gets cold at night, like most of the planet does, you're going to want some kind of air heater in the van. And what you don't want to do is have an electric air heater, because if you thought induction cookers were powerful, oh boy, do the calculations for an electric air heater and you'll realize that if you make the entire van batteries, you might be all right, but otherwise you're not going to be. And so you go, well, okay, I can't use electricity. I have to use one of 2 other sources, either propane, pressurized gas, or fuel. So either diesel or petrol/gasoline from the vehicle's fuel tank. Those are kind of your 2 choices you're left with. They both have pros and cons. There are different reasons for different ones. In general, the fuel systems are more convenient. They pull from the same vehicle tank. It's pretty handy. You just pump it up and you're done and everything runs. But they do have problems with high altitude. And when we say high altitude, they mean lower altitude than where this workshop is based. This is already a mile above sea level. If you go to the Rocky Mountains, you're going up, another good several thousand feet. Those things just don't have a good time up there. They really struggle to ignite the fuel and burn it cleanly. You get a lot of carbon and soot built up on your thing. You're going to clean it out a lot. I don't want that. I live at high altitude all the time. I'm going to travel to high altitude a lot of the time. And so that's why I'm going with a propane-based air heating system. Very similar idea between both of them. Both the propane and the fuel ones, they have a separate combustion air in and out that goes outside the vehicle, and then it's kind of a heat exchanger to then draw in inside vehicle air, heat it on the exchanger and expel it. So you're never actually breathing the combustion result. It's always clean air, but they are just differing in how I heat the air. And both of those are pretty good. I'm doing propane. And as soon as you go, I'm doing propane, Well, now you've got a propane system in the van, and propane's annoying. It's poisonous. You've got to vent it out below the van, as I'll talk about when I build the locker and other things. But once you've done the effort to get propane in there, well, you may as well use propane for other things. It's an incredibly energy-dense energy source. And so once I've got propane in the van, I was like, well, in that case, I'm also going to have a propane-powered cooktop/hob, whatever you want to call it, US versus British English. I'm going to have a propane-powered water heater for the shower, because those are pretty common, they're pretty powerful. Like, these things just make sense at that point. Maybe you can put a separate propane hookup for a barbecue outside, I don't know. But once you've got that in there, you may as well use it. If you weren't doing propane, if you went to the fuel heater for the air heating, well, you can't really repurpose the fuel heater for anything else. They do make some fuel heaters that have a hot water component too. That is handy. Might have had one of those if I lived at low altitude. But in terms of cooking, you can't be using that fuel for cooking, doesn't work. So at that point, you're left with either having a separate camping stove with its own mini propane bottle or butane bottle. You might go for the electric cooker option with the induction that I mentioned previously, or you might just go with like wooden campfires. It's kind of everyone's choice. You can even go microwave if you want. Like, microwaves, ironically, generally draw less power than the induction cookers. So you can often take a microwave in terms of power usage where you can't take an induction one. So there's a lot of options there, and it kind of depends on what you choose for your basic air heating as to what you then go on and choose for the sources for other stuff. But given I have propane, I'm willing to take on that risk, build the airtight locker, build the vents, do the gas piping, do the pressure tests. Once I've got that, it's a pretty obvious choice to then use that for everything else. One more thing with utilities, it's nice to have all the things that use the water or the gas lines on one side of the van. It simplifies your piping. But in my case, I have my sink and my shower on opposite sides, and I'm not really willing to trade off the layout to make the piping easier. It just means a bit more piping for me. I can do that, that's fine. So that's one thing to consider, along with, of course, weight and balance. You want your water tanks and your batteries and your gas tanks as low as possible. You want them close to the rear axle as possible. So in my case, the batteries and the water tank are directly over the rear axle, basically next to the wheel wells, and the gas tanks are right sort of just slightly further back than that. So the weight's all there where the van is strongest and designed to have its cargo load. So that's pretty important too. So that's layout. There's a lot of factors, right? There's not a lot of obvious options you can pick. No one thing is going to fit everyone. So if you want to do a van build, if you're planning one or thinking about one, I recommend just like think about what you want. What is your mission? How are you going to use it? What environments are you going to use it in even? And how does that affect what you want out of it? Are you going with friends? Like, what kind of places are you going? All of these factor in, and you should consider how you're doing it. And in terms of like trying layouts and seeing how they fit, there's a couple of options. I went fancy and used a 3D modeling program, Blender, to lay it out. And the nice thing about that is I can take my 3D model, I can whip it into VR, I can pop the VR headset on and walk around it virtually. That's really powerful and very handy. But you don't have to do it that high tech. You can just use bits of cardboard cut out and some graph paper and get a good idea of it that way. Either way, I do think it is worth, once you have finished doing the flooring and the walls and you've got the rough interior shape of the van, it is still worth doing a sort of full-scale mock-up out of cardboard or other cheap materials and just going and walking through it. Make sure your elbow room makes sense, the head heights feel good, the upper cabinets aren't too close, all the things that are hard to see even in a 3D model. Those are really important to go and consider. But I've done as much of those as I can. I think I'm good to go. I've almost certainly made a mistake, but that's part of this. I am going into this going, I'm going to get this 90% right, and that's good enough for me. So I need to go buy some flooring and get some foam and do all those busy things. And also I need to go edit this video. And so I'm going to go do that. And I will see you next time when we talk about flooring. See you then.